Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane, online fitness coach, nutritionist, and 3-time best-selling author, here to help you with deconstructing expert guests on all things health, fitness, and mindset. Today's guest is with Sean Casey. Sean is somebody who I've been following since his very early days, and over the last 2 years, he has exploded on social media. He has over 2.2 million followers on TikTok, over 300,000 followers on social media, and has used it to grow an incredibly successful business online. We actually broke this podcast into two parts because Sean puts out such valuable content when it comes to fitness, weight loss, and fat loss, but he also works with helping people to grow their social media and building their business. So instead of doing a little bit for part one or for a full episode, I've actually broken it up into two parts. So very grateful for Sean that we got to go deep on two very different styles of episode. Today's episode, we focus on fat loss. So how to lose belly fat, some of the biggest misconceptions that he sees online, the difference between losing fat and burning fat, the worst advice he sees on the internet, social media, and in diet books, how to train for fat loss, and some of the reasons that people struggle with it. So if you have a weight loss, fat loss, or body composition goal, this part one is the episode for you. So I'll also, as I mentioned, next week will be part two, very different. It'll be on the social media side and how to grow your business, how to turn your passion into full-time income. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, I highly recommend staying tuned for part two. That'll be out next Monday. But without further ado, here is the first part of a two-part series or a two-part episode with Sean Casey on how to lose belly fat, the difference between burning fat and losing fat, and the worst diet advice on the internet. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Sean Casey. Sean is an online fitness coach and he has over 300,000 followers on Instagram, over 2.2 million followers on TikTok, and he uses his platforms to give people simple recipes and fitness tips. He's also the head coach of the Sean Casey Academy and the owner of SC Social Circle, which is a social media growth course that helps you turn your passion into a full-time income. I've been following Sean since the early days and love his no bullshit approach to health and fitness. So I'm really looking forward to talking all things weight loss, fitness, and social media in today's episode. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
You were one of the first, Brian. You were one of the first. I remember I just started making content and I got this stitch in one of the videos I'd done. It's like, Brian King stitched my video. So you were one of the first people with a big platform that I actually communicated with and talked with. So I thought that was a really cool experience to be like, oh, I'm talking with Brian King here at the very, very start. I mean, I was only a few months into posting content at that stage and it was still very much in the learning stage. And this podcast helped me massively, like especially episodes such as the nutrition deep dive and things like that. They're all episodes that not so long ago I was out walking my dog, listening to, taking notes. So it feels cool to be on the podcast now.
Oh mate, it feels like a full circle moment for sure. And I have been so happy to see your growth. Like you have exploded over the last year and a half. And I'm not surprised. Like when I saw the content that was going up and the one that I stitched, like I was in hysterics with it. For anyone that's unfamiliar, it was basically like a mad tea recipe for weight loss, and then you chucked it in the toilet in the end. Yeah. and I got so much feedback on that, and then I know people kind of went over to yours, and then you were just being consistent and relentless with content. But like I have to say, looking on it from the outside, and I've been following it since very early on, like your content's fantastic. Like you provide so much value to people who follow you on TikTok, on Instagram, in terms of recipe ideas and training tips and fitness tips. So again, we're going to get into all of that in today's podcast as we go along. But talk to us, Sean, about your backstory and kind of what got you into health and fitness. I know you put up a lot of your own, your 12-week transformation and where you kind of came out from it. But tell us all, for those who are unfamiliar with your actual backstory, kind of what got you into the world of health and fitness and what kind of laid the foundation for you to kind of explode on these social media platforms.
Yeah, so absolutely everything that I do to do with health and fitness, social media, business, it all stems from a problem that I once had and figured out how to solve, and then helping other people do the same thing. So my whole life I was into the typical, like I was always into fitness, always into sports, so I was naturally in shape. And then when I got to 16, 17, I stopped doing the sports that I'd done. I boxed at a high level, stopped doing that. I was maybe partying a bit too much and drinking, and for the first time in my life I realized that I'd got out of shape, and I didn't understand why, because naturally, just from the amount of sports, and I come from quite a healthy family, I was always in shape, but I found myself, I was like, I put on fat here, I don't know what to do about it. And then I went down all the different routes, the fad diets, and I watched a YouTube video talking about ketosis, and I thought the only way to lose fat is by cutting out all carbohydrates, because I need to be in fat burning mode. So I went through all these different phases of trying to figure out what worked and being lied to online, and then eventually I started discovering evidence-based content, learning about, instead of specific methods of fat loss, learning about the principles, so I could find methods that work best for me. So then I got myself back in shape, and I was like, this is really cool, but every person I talk to is asking me how I done this, what was the secret? And then I knew at that stage there was no secret to getting in shape. You had to learn about the principles and then sort of come up with your own method from there. So I decided, I was still at university, I wasn't a personal trainer at the time, but I was all like, I solved this problem myself, so I want to help other people solve the problem. So I started with making a YouTube video. This was during lockdown, so this was May 2020, and no one in the local area even really talks on their social media, talks in their stories. So making a YouTube video was like, this was a big deal. So I made the YouTube video, I posted it on my Facebook, everyone was sharing it, and lots of people were saying it was very good, it was helping them a lot, because it was titled How to Lose Fat, and I talked about the principles, calories in, calories out, my preferred method. So from there, I literally just posted every single day on social media. I kept posting, and I kept trying to help people and help people solve problems. And the most important thing is I kept learning. I'll admit myself, at the start, I thought it was calories in, calories out. I know everything there is to know about fat loss. But then the more you start to dive into the complexities of obesity and the different circumstances and people's lifestyle factors, you realize that there's much more that goes into it. But I think for a lot of people, educating them on the principles first and then worrying about the complexities after is extremely important. But it has been, in the past 2 years, it's been a huge learning curve for me. I've been learning as I've been going, but it all stems from, as I said, I solved the problem from myself, and then I want to help other people solve this same problem. And obviously it's blown up from there, which is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's the curse of knowledge, isn't it? Nearly the less you know, the less you realize you know. Because when you have a small bit of, I was the same. When I started first as personal training and nutrition, I was, well, everybody needs to eat clean and everybody needs to train with giant sets and circuits. Like, that was my thing. And then as you start to go into the evidence and the research, you're like, oh, actually, there's a load of different nutritional strategies that work, and there's a loads of different training programs that work. Of course, there's parameters that are going to be the best based on a goal, or principles for fat loss, such as calories in, calories out. But there's so much nuance. But as you said, it's nearly a foundation of, well, what's the bottom of the foundations when it comes to fat loss? It's going to be calories in, calories out, and then everything else builds on top of that. Food choices, the systems, and whatever it is you use. What were some of the biggest mistakes you made when it came to before you got in? I saw a recent video you posted on Instagram that, you talked about, first thing you did was establish your maintenance was around 3,000 calories, and you started eating at 2,500 calories, and then it built from there. But what were some of the mistakes nutritionally that you made in the early days when you were like, because I have so many, but they were years ago at this point. I look back and I cringe when I think about them. But what were some of the ones you made?
So before I even learned properly about the fundamentals of fitness, I thought that this fat burning mode was something that I had to get myself into, because I watched one YouTube video and they had all these diagrams going on, and they're all like, if you cut out all carbohydrates, your body goes from using glycogen as fuel to using fat as fuel. And I was like, this is magical. Why is no one talking about this? So I used to go and I went to Tack, and I would always get like a chicken fillet roll at lunch from Downey's, which is the local butchers in Newry. I went in one day and I was all like, what can I actually eat here? I can't eat carbs because I need to burn fat. So I was all like, just give me chicken. And then I was just eating chicken, and I realized that this was completely unsustainable. So I went through that stage. But it's only when you go back and then you think about, like, what they were saying was true. It does put you in fat burning mode, but there's a difference between burning fat and losing fat. And that's why it's so complex for a lot of people, because they're consuming content and they're listening to things that are technically true. So you're going to burn more fat if you cut out all carbohydrates. But what you don't actually take into account is it's because you're eating more fat, and it's because you're going to burn fat 24/7 and you're not going to burn carbs anymore. But you're like, but that doesn't actually make a difference, because if you're still consuming too many calories, then you're not going to lose any body fat, even if you're constantly burning fat. So I think that there needs to be more clear and concise information, because a lot of the time you can't say that person's lying. It's because they're not actually lying, but what they're saying is misinterpreted by their audience, and then they think that they have to do different things. So that was a learning curve for me. And then when I got into it and started learning about the evidence behind it, I was very much like, right, I'll track my calories because this is a foolproof way to create a calorie deficit, and that's what works best for me. But it's only after I was a year into it, I was like, everyone should track their calories. It's the only way to create a calorie deficit. But that was a mistake on my behalf, because just because that works best for me, it doesn't mean that it's necessary to lose fat. There's people that do the ketogenic diet and it works for them. People do intermittent fasting. People do like all these different things, 1 meal a day. It's not necessarily like there's a good and a bad. It's different things are suited to different people. So at the start, I was just plain making mistakes because I didn't understand the fundamentals. And then after I learned the fundamentals, I even made mistakes because I thought everyone should be prescribed to the same method. But once you understand that, you can sort of identify that different methods are suited to different people, and there's not actually necessarily anything wrong with these different diets as long as the person understands the reason why they work. Like, there's nothing wrong with someone doing a ketogenic diet if they genuinely function better, they feel better, maybe it helps them with their appetite. But there is something wrong with someone doing a ketogenic diet if they think it's necessary because it puts them in fat burning mode. So there's a lot of complexities to fitness and fat loss, and it's not like there's a right or wrong. I feel like a lot of people, when they're talking about their different methods, they're trying to prescribe the one method to everyone. Whereas what I look at it from, I say, this is the principle and this is my preferred method. I have a bias towards calorie tracking because it's what's worked for me, but I'm not saying that you have to track your calories or everyone has to. All I'm saying is you need to be educated on why fat loss works so you can make an informed decision on the different method that you choose.
And one of the, again, it's nearly a mirroring of the content. It's why I love the message so much, because you have that principle approach, because there are certain principles of fat loss in particular that people need to adhere to. Like, you can't eat a 2,000 calorie surplus every day and expect to lose body fat, although some keto advocates might say otherwise. But unless you're grounded in nutritional science, I'm like, you can't get past the first law of thermodynamics. It's energy in, energy out. You can't eat 2,000 calories and be in a ketogenic diet and still expect to lose the weight. With the burning fat versus losing fat, that's a great line. I really like that language and how you used it. What was the thing that opened up your education around that? Because, you know, as you mentioned, burning fat and losing fat are two different things. You can explain that, you think you did with the burning fat, but what kind of gave you that aha moment? Was it the fact that you were eating calories and still not losing the weight and said, well, actually something's off here, I need to educate myself further? Or what did your personal process look like?
So I actually didn't even fully understand it until after I'd started making content, because I knew it was calories in, calories out. But then it was only when I went into the further learning that I understood the difference between fat burning and fat loss. Now, when I tried to go keto and cut out all carbs, I lasted a few days, and then my mate told me to wise up, and then I ended up just putting on more weight after that because it wasn't sustainable. But the aha moment for me was just through listening to like exactly what people are doing at this minute. Like, I listen to a podcast every single morning on a different topic. If someone asked me a question I didn't know the answer, I would go and make sure to find out. So for me, it could have been on your podcast, it could have been on any podcast, but just listen to these different people talk about the complexities. So fat burning means that you're burning fat in that moment. You're burning fat and using that as fuel. So this can be applied to the ketogenic diet. People say, oh, you're burning fat all the time. It can also be applied to fasted cardio. People say fasted cardio is better for fat loss because when you do fasted cardio, you don't have glycogen in your system, so you have to use fat. And this sounds really good, and it's true. It is 100% true. But then people think fat burning and fat loss are the same thing. You take two people, one of them is doing fasted cardio and one of them is doing their cardio fed. The person that does the fasted cardio will burn more fat while they're doing cardio. But if you equate both of these people's calories throughout the 24-hour period, their fat loss will be exactly the same, because after the cardio, then once they eat, they'll use glycogen the rest of the day. The person that ate before the cardio will use their glycogen for their workout, and they'll use fat the rest of the day. So this fat burning, it makes no difference. So when you hear people say these buzzwords like fasted cardio for fat burning, carbohydrate for fat burning, fasting for fat burning, it's calories in, calories out for fat loss. But we can talk about fat burning all day, but that is the issue. That's the main issue that I'm trying to get across. These people aren't lying. but they're telling the truth, but then know that it's going to be misinterpreted. So people think that their method is best. It doesn't matter whether you do your cardio fasted. If you want to do it because you prefer doing it like that, that's fine. Or if you want to do it fed. But what I firmly disagree with is people setting rules and boundaries. You have to cut out carbohydrates. You have to do your cardio fasted. I think the world would be a much better place, and the fitness industry would be a much better place if people were fully on the table. This is my preferred method. This is why I prefer it. But saying you have to do this, you have to do that, it's the only way to do it. It's not. We need to be aware of the principles and separate principles from method.
Yeah, I love that. And something I've tried to do on this podcast, and not always successfully, I might add, is bring on different people to talk about their methods or their principles in terms of what they believe in. Now, I always try and have a little bit of a counter argument when somebody says something that's, a bit left field without all the context. Like you mentioned, it's technically true, but I'm like, well, you do need to give all the context here. Like the fasted cardio, like again, something I used and very successfully when I was competing in bodybuilding and fitness modeling was fasted cardio, but that's because it suited my schedule to get up early and to do it, and it meant that I was more energized at that time of the day, and when I would have my weight workout later in the day, it meant I didn't have to worry about my cardio. So context really matters here, and unless you're getting all of that for people listening, it confuses them, which normally and ultimately leads to frustration. With the different methods, you did a great video, and I was going to bring this up later, but I want to bring it back now. I saw it yesterday when I was going through some of your recent content about the books that are out there, and I think you can put the internet into this bracket as well when it comes to social media influencers and people who might necessarily have maybe not even a hidden agenda, maybe a plain agenda to push a specific diet or push a specific method and say it's the only way. And a lot of books, and as somebody who writes books, we all have a bias that we bring to it. Like I'm very biased on the way you approach a nutritional plan, the mindset you bring. So like we all have our own bias that we bring. But you did a video recently on the best or top or most popular diet books out there. I've read them, so you don't have to. Talk about that video, just because something I haven't covered recently on the podcast, although I've talked about it in solo episodes, is that approach where people will have their agenda that they're trying to promote, and nobody should eat vegetables, nobody should eat plants or legumes, nobody should eat meat, nobody should eat lectins or whatever it is. You have insert food group here. Talk to us about that video and some of the things that you found from reading those books.
Yeah, so I took some of the popular nutrition books, but see what you need to understand with books and with studies. You're going to have a study to back up any opinion. You're going to have a book to back up any opinion. So if you take these popular nutrition books, and all of them are backed with studies, they're written by smart people. It's not like there's just stupid people writing these books. They're well researched. They're published authors. They're published researchers. But if you take all these popular books, and some of them, the books stand alone, they make good points, etc. in them, but if you take all the advice from these books, you would be left with literally nothing left to eat. So in the book in the video I put a full day of eating in front of me, a healthy, nutritious full day of eating. I said if I took the advice from this book, couldn't eat breakfast. This book, couldn't eat this meal. This book, couldn't eat this meal. So it's about, just because someone has a book, or just because someone is a doctor or author or whatever, it doesn't mean that what they're saying is gospel. Because if you take the advice from all these people, you would be left with literally nothing to eat. And that's something that I think people need to understand, because oftentimes it can be easy to be like, oh, I read it in a book, or I seen it, a doctor said this, but everyone has different opinions. If you go onto the internet, there's people telling you not to eat vegetables. There's people telling you only to eat vegetables. There's people telling you to dry fast. There's people telling you not to drink your tap water. If you listen to everyone, you would be left with absolutely nothing. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't even live. There's people telling you certain clothes that you can't wear. So it's not even just fitness, it's life in general. You need to put together a plan that actually fits in with your lifestyle. You need to understand the principles, but listen to all this white noise and these different people saying all these things that you can and can't do. For the most part, in terms of living a healthy life, there's some basic principles that you need to stick to. You need to be a calorie controlled diet, eating enough protein, getting a variety of micronutrients, eating veg, just a varied, balanced diet. But when you're going into the complexities of don't eat this vegetable because it has this in it, it's just ridiculous. It's unnecessary overcomplication. And when we're talking about leading a healthy life, there's so much more that you can do than focus on all these things that you can eliminate from your diet.
Couldn't agree more. And I think when weight loss, fat loss, or body composition are the goal, it's always worth considering that the extremity of the diet needs to reflect the extremity of the goal. And if weight loss and and fat loss and body composition, although hard goals to hit, they're not extreme goals for the majority of people. Maybe someone in the obese category, yes, but this is why the ketogenic diet works so well for people with epilepsy, or potentially reducing lectin intake for eczema, things along those lines. They're kind of quite extreme issues that people have, and that's really where a lot of these diets can be useful in terms of arming yourself with knowledge. But when you have a general goal, weight loss, fat loss, muscle building, there's certain principles you have to follow that it's about, well, what applies to you, what works for you, what foods do you enjoy, what foods do you like, what can you stick to, as opposed to somebody on the opposite end of a spectrum with, epilepsy or eczema or something that they're really trying to dial in. And when I think of the ketogenic diet, like that was designed originally when it comes to research and study for epileptics, and then it kind of filtered its way down into weight loss. And even though I'm a fan of it for endurance runners as well, when I train for 100-mile ultras, I tend to do a lot of ketogenic diets and putting myself into that state just because it supports that training. But when I think of it for weight loss, keto diet in particular, it's like trying to hang a picture in your wall with a fucking sledgehammer. Like the tool isn't fit for purpose. It's too extreme, but it will work for some people. And if it works for you, by all means, keep it. I want to kind of reverse out of that slightly, just because there's so much that we could potentially go into there, and I think I'm going to link
talk
up.
all day.
We could talk all day. We could talk all day on just myths and misconceptions that are online. But one of my favorites, and one I want to talk about, just because I know you put up a recent video on this, even though I think I saw it on TikTok ages ago. Now, I'm not the best consumer on TikTok. I'm not even the best consumer on Instagram. We call a spade a spade. I'm a podcast guy first. Like I listen to your show. I didn't mention that in the description, but I'll link it for people to connect. I was on your show and you've had some great guests on there as well. I recently listened to the episode with the protein bar with James Doyle as well, so I really enjoyed that one. But belly fat, this is something that it's so weird how people get so like and angry at titles of videos, and in your case not watching them all the way to the end. Talk to us about how to lose belly fat. And this is something that it comes up a lot on my TikTok when I am going through the feed, people saying this is the workout or exercise for losing belly fat. And I won't say I get angry with it, because I don't. I'm just not that triggered by social media anymore. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm well past that stage. But people do get triggered by it. And I've seen it on your page. I've seen it on other pages, even when they've missed the context. Talk to us about how to lose belly fat, and even more accurately, talk to us about how not to lose belly fat when it comes to some of the things you'd see. I would imagine TikTok is the worst for this, but I'm sure it's on Instagram as well.
Yeah, so belly fat is... It's a common, loads of videos are made about it, because that's one of the main areas people want to lose fat from. So a lot of people understand, if I make this video telling people that they can lose belly fat specifically, it's going to get lots of views and engagement. So oftentimes you'll have influencers and stuff pointing to their belly and then doing like crunches and different ab exercises and saying that you can spot reduce fat. But unfortunately, it isn't the case. What you want to do is think about your fat loss like a bathtub. And when you're losing fat, you're getting a cup and taking it into that tub and taking a bit of water out. The water represents fat. You can't just take water from the corner and then it'll all disappear from the corner, because when you take water from the corner, it goes down evenly. So fat loss is like that. It is slightly different, because genetically speaking, some people lose fat on some areas faster than others. For example, when someone starts a calorie deficit, they might lean out in their face completely and then lose fat in their body after. Some people might lose fat from their stomach first. Oftentimes though, people are losing belly fat last. So that's why they think it's stubborn. They think, I need to be doing something specific to target this belly fat, because I've been in a calorie deficit, I'm losing fat everywhere else, and it's not coming off. But unfortunately, we can't spot reduce fat. And the answer that a lot of people don't like to hear is the only way that you can lose this belly fat is by consistently staying in a calorie deficit, and eventually it will subside, it will disappear as long as you consistently stay in a deficit. And there's even more confusion now, because a lot of people are making videos on TikTok about the differences between visceral fat and subcutaneous fat, and they're talking about visceral fat, they're calling it belly fat. So they're like, here's how you can reduce your belly fat. They're not saying visceral fat, they're saying here's how you can reduce your belly fat. And cardio, it's been shown in the evidence that you can actually reduce visceral fat. So this is fat that sits deep within your abdominal walls that you can't actually see, touch or feel through just doing cardio without actually being in a calorie deficit. However, when people are talking about the belly fat that is on their stomach, they're talking about the subcutaneous fat. So this confuses people even more. They're all like, wait, so it's not a calorie deficit I need, I just need to be doing cardio, when in actual fact, that's going to be really good for your health. But when we're talking about belly fat, aesthetically based belly fat that we can actually see that's sitting thick on you, the only way, literally the only way that you can lose that, it's not through exercise, it's through consistently staying in a calorie deficit. But that doesn't get views, that doesn't go viral, that's not going to get you loads of followers. But these influencers realize it's like a lack of creativity. They're like, if I purposely mislead my audience, then I'll get views and I'll get followers, and it's good for them, it's good for their ego and their business and their following, but it's not good for the people consuming the content, unfortunately. That's why you need people to say, this is the reality of it, it's not sexy, you're not doing any fancy dances, but this is how you get to where you want to be.
It's so true. That's the downside of social media. It's why I've always been kind of, in more recent years anyway, a podcast first, because the beauty of chatting to someone on a podcast, and you know this as someone that goes on podcasts and is a host of a podcast, if someone's full of shit, you can see it quite quickly. And it's very easy to navigate around it. Whereas on TikTok, on Instagram, on social media, you can kind of say what you want. And if you throw in a couple of buzzwords and a couple of studies, or you just touch on a trigger point for people, i.e. belly fat. Because what I found, and I'm sure it's the same in the academy with the people you work with, Sean, is when someone has belly fat, that tends to be all they can see. I put it in the last book about the negativity bias, that they might be losing fat everywhere, but because their belly fat isn't reducing, they're like, well, this is all they can see when they look in the mirror. And the unsexy reality of it is it's patience with that calorie deficit. Now, the beauty of that, and some people will say, well, there's insulin and all of that. Well, if you're in a deficit, you're probably going to make yourself more insulin sensitive as you go along anyways, because your body will become slightly dependent on your macros, but potentially a bit more fat adapted and a bit metabolically more flexible. So all those things kind of happen as a result, but that's not sexy. It also takes a while to explain. It's the same when someone says, this is my biggest pet peeve at the minute. I was on Ethan Supple's podcast recently, The American Glutton. He's on my show. I think it's out right before we record this one. And he was talking about the Beverly Hills diet being his biggest pet peeve, and I was talking about teas, that the weight loss teas and fat loss teas, and the drink this and you'll get 23% increase in metabolic rate. I'm like, your fucking metabolic rate is a lot more complicated than drink this tea and your metabolic rate goes up. Now, there's things you can do, resistance training, high sleep quality, all these things will impact metabolic rate in a positive way, but it's just a particular pet peeve. And I think losing belly fat and those videos, particularly exercise choices like crunches and anything along those lines, it does confuse people, because part of us wants to believe it because it's a pain point and it's all someone can see when that's what they're trying to reduce and trying to get down. With the content that you see on social media, particularly TikTok, because it's just, I've seen some viral videos on TikTok that I'm like, how did that go viral? Like, that's not science. Like, that's just so wherever that came from. What are some of the ones you see currently? Is it still in that realm of belly fat being the primary one, or are there any other ones that are kind of doing the rounds on TikTok or social media at the minute that you see, Sean?
Yeah, it all of these videos that I see stem from overcomplication, and it's the sort of the white lies where they're saying stuff that's technically true. Oftentimes what you'll see now is people that claim to be doctors, or even if they are doctors, chiropractors, whatever they happen to be, drawing diagrams on TikTok talking about insulin responses and how if you spike your insulin's a fat storing hormone. So when you constantly spike your insulin throughout the day, you can't lose fat. And these are getting millions of views, and people are like, oh, I've been doing it wrong. And it's because it's a doctor, and it's someone with obviously this hidden agenda, because when you go onto the link on their profile, they're selling supplements, they're selling this, they're selling that. But when you watch the video, the millions of views, they're just drawing diagrams and stuff that they're not even explaining properly. So often what you'll hear people say is, when you eat carbohydrate, it spikes your insulin. Insulin is known to be a storage hormone, so it's a fat storage hormone. So if you're constantly spiking your insulin, you're constantly storing fat. There's no way that you can lose fat. So this is a theory that different doctors and stuff had. And it's a nice theory because it makes sense. Insulin is a storage hormone. But when you actually take a dive into it and you look at the studies, or meta-analysis better, which is a completion of multiple studies that compare low fat versus low carb diet, when calories and protein are equated, it shows, there's no doubt about it, it shows fat loss is exactly the same. So you'd think that people would take this theory that they had and be like, right, well, the studies have disproven it. But for some reason, people want to continue to go down the rabbit hole and continue to try and push this. And it's extremely harmful because, in my opinion, it's more unnecessary confusion. It's unnecessary for confusion to push an agenda. And I feel like I can't see a world where these people that are pushing this don't know that they're wrong, because if I have one comment that disagrees with me in a video that I've made to do with something to do with fitness, you can be assured that I'm going and checking the research, I'm checking the evidence. Did I actually get this wrong? So if your whole business is built off the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity, surely you're going to be backtracking and being like, right, what do the studies actually say? Is this actually what's causing fat loss, fat gain? And in my opinion, a lot of the time people believe this at the start, but now they've built their business around it, they've built their following around it, they're making millions, hundreds of thousands, millions off it, so they can't backtrack now. So instead of admitting that they're wrong, admitting that there's more to it, it's just their preferred method. You don't actually have to do that to lose fat. They go deeper and deeper into it, and then unfortunately this just leads to people getting misinformation. And then one common theme that you'll find if they're talking about the carbohydrate insulin model, if they're talking about foods that you can't eat ever if you want to lose fat, this guy, he's called Dave's Weight Loss. I called him out once. He has about 10 different videos. Here's the foods that you can't eat if you want to lose fat, because he knows that they go viral. He's listed about 100 different foods that you can't eat if you want to lose fat, and it's ridiculous. And then I actually done an expose on him where I clicked on his profile, went to the link, looked at the expensive supplements he was selling, but of course that got took down for bullying. So you just need to be aware that if someone is promising you the world, or saying that their method is the best for fat loss, or saying you have to cut out this or you have to do that, if it seems like all this unnecessary complication, it probably is. And that's just something that you need to be aware of when you're scrolling on TikTok, because it's the catchy stuff that gets you. Here's 5 foods that you can't eat if you want to lose fat. Straight away you're hooked in. Or it's all like, you've been trying to lose fat by reducing your calories. Actually, look at this diagram that I'm drawing that I have no idea what I'm talking about. That's the videos that get you. So it's just, I feel like you become immune to it if you follow enough evidence-based people. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in the right place. If you're consuming our content, you're in the right place. But it's just about consuming and understanding the topics, because you can know that it's at calories in, calories out. You can be like, yeah, you need a calorie deficit to lose fat. But if you don't actually understand the mechanisms behind that and why it works, and understand the mechanisms, when someone presents you something different, if you don't actually fully understand calories in, calories out, you're like, do they actually have a point? Maybe this content I've been consuming is wrong. And then you can go with them and you can get led astray. So what I'd say to people, it's not just good enough to be like, yeah, I know I need to eat in a calorie deficit. You need to understand that that's a principle. You need to understand why it works. And then you need to understand why these things aren't good that the people are talking about. So you need to understand there's studies that back up that low fat and low carb aren't really any different. But once you do understand that and get your head around it, the internet and TikTok and these different misinformation videos become a lot easier to navigate around.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And the low carb versus low fat, I always tell people it's whatever you can stick to and whatever you can adhere to. And different people have preferences. I've had Ross Edgley's been on the podcast a few times. Ross swam around Great Britain and did some incredible things.
Mad.
He's an incredible dude and just the nicest guy as well. But we had a conversation on one of our episodes about carb people versus fat people, and we're in opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, Ross loves high carbohydrate and fueling his body with carbohydrate, and he's like, as long as my fat is just ticking over to keep hormones balanced, etc., I feel good. And I'm the reverse. You can drop my carbs to 0, but as long as my fat stays high, I feel amazing. I actually feel the opposite if my carbs go too high. Even training for a 100-mile ultramarathon, I can't go too high carb because I feel sluggish and watery and I don't feel fueled. So my body works better off fat. And everyone's going to have a little bit of a preference. And the example he gave is you can kind of tell by what would you choose for breakfast faster. You know, would you like some eggs with a load of almond butter or peanut butter, or would you like a massive bowl of honey and porridge? And most people will gravitate towards one or the other. And that kind of gives you an idea on your preference. And then once you control for calories, hitting your protein, for weight loss in particular, it's like, well, what would you prefer to do? What works better for you? What can you stick to? Because ultimately, adherence is key, particularly with a calorie deficit for someone looking to lose fat. With that principle, can you briefly explain and I'm sure people at this point know calorie deficit in and out, because I have mentioned it so often on this podcast, but every once in a while it's from someone else or from you, Sean, or from another guest who will say it in a different way and it connects and it lands. Talk to us about that underlying principle, because I think I think of not understanding a calorie deficit for weight loss like going to war without any gun or ammunition. I'm like, well, you can go to war, but you'll probably get killed. I was like, I'd rather have a gun and some ammunition. Weight loss, I think, and calorie deficits are similar, and fat loss. You need to understand that principle before you read any book or listen to any podcast. So can you explain that for us?
Yeah, so calories are your source of energy. You need calories to stay alive. That's how you do stuff on a daily basis. We're all burning calories at the minute. You need to burn calories just to stay alive. So Obviously, the place where you're getting these calories from is food. So let's say that you burn 2,000 calories a day. Now, firstly, we need to point out that you don't have to go and burn 2,000 calories a day. In fact, 60% roughly for the average person of your calorie burning it's already done for you. So you burn calories just by being alive. I'm talking at the minute, I'm moving my hand, blinking, I'm fidgeting. This is all my NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, accounts for about 20%. You burn calories while you eat food, and then of course you burn calories while you exercise. So when I say you need to eat less than you burn, you don't have to go out and burn calories. Obviously, it helps that you're exercising on top, and that's still going to account for some. But you just need to be eating less than you burn. So let's say you burn 2,000 calories a day. If you're getting 2,000 calories a day from your food, you're eating the same amount. Your body is getting the energy that it needs to get you through the day. It's getting the fuel that it needs from your food. It has absolutely no reason for you to be getting energy from anywhere else. Let's say if you burn 2,000 calories a day and you eat 2,500, you're only burning 2,000, so you don't need this extra 500 calories. So what it does with the extra 500 calories is all like, we can't burn them because we're not using enough energy, so we're going to put this in storage, so it'll store it as fat. Now, vice versa, when we talk about a calorie deficit, this means that you're eating less than you burn. So if you're burning 2,000 and you're only eating 1,500 calories, you're using the energy, so it's impossible for you not to get it from somewhere. So what your body does, it goes to this stored energy, so you have stored fat, and it uses the fat for energy. And that's the principle of it. That it is as simple as that. If you're eating less than you burn, it's physically impossible for your body just to create energy out of nowhere. It has to get it from somewhere. So if you're not getting enough energy from your food, it takes it from your fat stores, and it really is that simple. You lose fat if you are eating less than you burn on a daily basis.
When it comes then to a fat loss goal, Sean, what's your preferred training method? Again, you could ask 100 different coaches, 100 different ways, and they'd all have their own version of CrossFit or circuits or cardio or HIIT or lists, etc. But for your preferred method for training for either yourself when you have a fat loss goal, or with clients or people that are coming through the academy that have a fat loss goal, what's your preferred method?
Yeah, so when we're talking about fat loss, I like to put the main focus on the amount of calories that we're consuming, because that's the most important thing. A lot of people, when they're talking about fat loss, they're like, what's the best exercise I can do for fat loss? And I'm like, exercise, yes, it can help you burn calories, but in my opinion, it's much healthier to use exercise for other things. So when someone talks about fat loss, the main thing that I'm focusing on with them is I'm focusing on their calorie goal and their step goal, because your step goal will help massively increase your expenditure and allow you to eat more while you're in a deficit. However, people often say to me, what's better for fat loss? Should I be doing cardio or should I be doing weightlifting? And I'll often reply, well, what's better, your dishwasher or your shower? And you're all like, they're used for different things. And I'm like, well, it's the same when we're talking about cardio and when we're talking about lifting weights. When we're lifting weights, we're not lifting weights to burn fat. What we're lifting weights to do is to build muscle and get stronger. If we have a higher muscle mass percent, it gives the illusion of a lower body fat percent, and this toned, in quotation marks, this toned look that people are often after. So we're not specifically lifting weights to lose fat or because it's good for fat loss. We're lifting weights because it's good for body composition. Now, in terms of cardio as well, cardio can be great to help you burn more calories, but I don't like the idea of someone getting on a running machine and running until they've hit 400 or 500 calories burned. What I prefer to say to people is we want to run or do any form of cardio, not because we think it's good for weight loss, but because it's good for our health. It's good for our heart health. It's good for our fitness. Think about it this way. Lifting weights as well as body composition, you want to be able to lift boxes off the ground when you get older. You want to be able to pick your children and your grandchildren up. When we're talking about cardio, you don't want to be doing that just to burn calories. You want to do cardio because as you get older, you want to walk up the stairs without being out of breath. You want to play in the garden with your children and your grandchildren without being out of breath. So I think it's much healthier to look at this whole weight loss thing as we need to control the amount of calories that we're eating, but we need to exercise for health, for body composition, and for all these other amazing reasons. Because another thing that people often don't think about, if your only goal is weight loss, that's all you're thinking about. What happens once you lose weight? Because it's all well and good, you're seeing the scales go down, you're getting compliments, but once you get to your goal weight, then what happens? You don't have these success metrics. You're not going to see the scales going down. So if you're exercising just to burn calories, it's not going to work. You need to exercise because you have goals. You want to get fitter. You want to set a new 5K PB. You want to lift heavier in the gym. I think that's a much healthier way to look at exercise. But when we're talking about fat loss, it's steps and it's your calories are the most important important thing, and then we're exercising for other reasons that will help our body composition and our health, but it's not necessarily because they're best for fat loss or you need to do them for fat loss, because you could lose fat without ever exercising. You could do that, no problem at all, and lots of people do that. However, that doesn't mean just because something's not good for weight loss or not necessary for weight loss doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it for other reasons. So we focus on our diet for losing weight, and then we exercise, which can help, but the main reason that we're doing that is for the health benefits and how it makes us look and feel.
Yeah, I really like that perspective with it. Something that I've shared with people on the podcast is resistance training and weight training and strength training, like, because that can increase your metabolic rate. I joked earlier about the T's. I'm like, if you're looking to, increase the amount of calories you're burning, you increase your lean muscle tissue, like you said. So that can help it in a secondary way, but also, as you said, it gives you that secondary goal that you're working towards. The problem with weight loss, and just to differentiate, weight loss and fat loss are two different things. Weight loss, reducing numbers on a scale; fat loss, reducing the amount of fat in your body. But when people hit that target, it's kind of a, well, now what happens? What do I do now? Whereas if you are actually setting goals for yourself to run a 5K or to lift or squat a certain amount in the weight or to bench a certain amount in the gym, all of that can help you stay focused with your mindset even when you hit that weight loss or fat loss target. And I think it's important to have those secondary goals and look at it with that perspective. Now, something that I've struggled with in the past is dietary adherence when I'm not following a training regimen, meaning that when I work out and keep that routine, I normally can adhere to my nutrition better. And there's a lot of people who will be similar, where it's great to be able to say, well, actually you're right, and as you mentioned, just because it can help with fat loss, training, exercise, etc., it's not necessary for fat loss. You can do it without, but you will also have the people like me who need to have both working simultaneously, or they'll struggle to adhere. And at the end of the day, it comes down to your adherence with your plan. I'm curious then, from your experience, Sean, what's some of the biggest struggles that you see with people for weight loss? For example, I generally have a lot of people who have issues around food, behavioral issues around food, separating food into good and bad categories, guilt and shame cycles around food. So when I'm working with people in programs, that can be the focus for quite a lot of people. But from your experience, what's one of the things that you see as the biggest struggle for people with a weight loss or a fat loss goal?
I think people have an all or nothing mentality, so they're either on or they're off. So oftentimes, and people will fall into this trap, they're doing really well with their diet, they're losing weight, but then they have one meal where they go over their calories, or one day where they go over their calories. So when people have this on-off switch, they're either good or they're bad. There's no in between. So when you go over your calories in one day, say it's a Thursday, you're like, oh, fucked up my calories for the week here. So what happens is they stay off track on the Friday, and then it rolls into the weekend. They're all like, oh, I'll just restart Monday. But instead of looking at it as on or off, we just need to look at it as a calorie amount, and your calories don't just automatically reset, they're constantly rolling. So next time you go over your calories, say if you're in a 500 deficit and you go 2,000 over your calories, if you stick to your deficit for the rest of the week, you're still going to lose weight because you're still in a deficit, even though you've had that one day off track. But what people, the issue have when people have this on or off switch, it's never the one meal, it's never the one day, it's how you react to that one meal or one day. So when people have this meal where they go off track, or they have a day where they binge, they think that they've messed up. And because they think that they've messed up, they're all like, oh, I've already messed up. So that they're in this off switch now. So they've went from an on switch to an off switch, and they think because they've already messed up, they may as well continue to. But if you can understand, one meal, one day literally makes no difference, but it's how you react to that. So if someone goes off track and then they use that as an excuse to binge for the next 3 days, the reason that they didn't make progress that week isn't because the one day they had off track, it's because the 3 days as a result of the one day. So I think instead of people looking at it as they're either off track or on track, they need to look at it as you're not going to be perfect all the time. There's going to be days where you go over your calories. There's going to be days where you can't stick to your calories because you've got events and things like that. But you can't let this affect you in a negative manner, because if you're reacting to that and thinking that you've messed up, that's when you actually start to lose progress and slow yourself down. So the most important thing that I think people need to realize when it comes to losing weight is it's a mindset thing. If you can rewire how you feel about your progress when you mess up or when you go slightly over your calories, and understand when you're looking at it as a mathematical thing, like this is the amount of calories that I need to stick to for the week, I've went over on this day, I'm still in deficit for the week, or even if you're up to maintenance or in a slight surplus, you can't do anything about the day that you had off track. All you can do is get back, and your body doesn't know that it's Saturday now and we'll just restart Monday. The best thing that you can do is just get back straight back to it straight away. People have this illusion in their head that they might be perfect for the first 3 weeks of their diet, and then they get this warped perception of reality that they can be perfect all the time. But life happens. Sometimes there's events, sometimes you get a bad night's sleep, you're stressed at work, so you just go over your calories. That it's not like you've done anything bad. It's completely fine. But the most important thing is your reaction when you do go off track, because inevitably, unless you're a robot, it will happen.
100%. Like, life gets in the way, and it's arming yourself with those tools, like that reset and restart as soon as you go off plan for the next day or for the next meal.
Mm-hmm.
And an analogy that I've used in the past that people have found helpful, and I took this from Siobhan O'Hagan when she was on the podcast, it's like going out on a Saturday night and blowing, €500 in coppers and just like going crazy in a nightclub. And it means on Sunday then that you've spent too much money. You probably won't go out for dinner that evening because you've spent it on the Saturday night. And your calories can be quite similar, meaning that you've gone over one day, you might make a slight adjustment the next day. Now, that's not to say you starve yourself, not to say you fast, especially if you have any sort of disordered eating pattern. That can be the worst thing that you do, because you end up unintentionally feeding that disordered eating by having that binge restrict cycle, and that is not something you want to do. But if you have a healthy relationship with food and you've gone over by 500 calories on a Saturday because you've gone out for a meal or whatever, and it hasn't been factored into your plan, then you might make a slight allowance the next couple of days. As long as you're in an overall deficit over those 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, etc., your body fat will come down. For the majority of people. For 99 out of 100 people, of course, you'll have that 1 out of 100 who have a hormonal imbalance or PCOS or have an underlying issue that's struggling with that. But for 99 out of 100 people, they will lose body fat and they'll lose weight. With weight loss then, Sean, and fat loss, where do you think supplements come in? Do you think they have a role? Do you think they can support people? Now, I have a very non-hidden agenda but bias towards over-the-counter fat burners. I'm not a fan because of all the negative behavior patterns that can come with them. They're basically putting a plaster over a bleeding wound if you have poor behavioral issues around food. So I'm not a fan of traditional fat burners per se, because of the quick fix scenario that comes with them and the rebound effect when people come off them, from an increase in appetite, reduction in movement from energy, from false energy with stimulants, etc. But where do you fall when it comes to supplements, and maybe fat burning supplements in particular?
Yeah, so I think that oftentimes when people see a body transformation, the first question to ask is what supplements do you take and what supplements, because they think if you replicate the supplements that someone's on, then you're going to look like them. 99% is just coming from your training and nutrition. Supplements are exactly what they say in the tin. They can supplement for something. Now, the main supplements I would take, is a lot of them is for health reasons, stress relief and things like that. A whey protein helps you meet your protein goal. It's one of the most popular supplements, but I just think about that as food. It's just food. Creatine can help with muscle development, but when we're talking about fat burning supplements, I don't rate them at all, especially if they're over the counter. They can just make you a bit overheated and stuff like that. Fat burning supplements only really work if they're legal. They don't really work that well, and if they're illegal, they work, but they come with this whole host of side effects and different things that just aren't worth it at all. I think for a lot of people, this is why it's so much more than calories in, calories out, because a lot of people think that they need supplements to control their appetite, but they're only sleeping for 5 hours every night. They're barely drinking any water during the day. They're not prioritizing nutrient dense food because they think if they just stick to 2,000 calories and eat whatever they want, then that's the best way to go about it, because that's what someone's told them online. So instead of looking for supplements as a way to control appetite or lose extra fat, what I like to do is your sleep in check. Sleep's one of the most beneficial supplements because you've got different hormones that regulate your appetite, ghrelin and leptin. When you don't get enough sleep, your ghrelin's upregulated, your leptin's downregulated. So you literally are 100% fact, you're more hungry, you're craving the worst sort of foods, and you're going to get full a lot less quickly. So instead of looking to supplements to control appetite, I look at sleep, I look at hydration, I look at food quality, prioritizing nutrient dense foods, because oftentimes once you get all these things in check, supplements aren't something that is even necessary. Like some of the main things I do to control my appetite, firstly sleep, as I've talked about. hydration. One of the best things that I do is eat my meals at the same time each day, because your hunger comes in waves. And if anyone works a job, you work an office job, and you have food at the same time each day with your office job, you'll start to notice that like 20 minutes before that you start to get hungry. So if you can try where possible to eat your meals at the same time each day, you'll start to get hungry at the same times each day, and then you'll find yourself less hungry outside of these windows. Another one for me, I used to snack a lot. Now I find if I can get the majority of my calories from meals and not snacks, it helps me control my appetite a lot more. So there's 1,000,001 different things that you can do to help with fat loss and help with appetite outside of calories in, calories out. And I think supplements would be the last thing on my list.
Love that. Sean, we're going to break this into a part 2. I wanted to, because you have so much value that you can add when it comes to building social media, how to turn your passion into a full-time income. So we'll want to separate it, just because there's going to be a portion of people who are all about body composition, weight loss, fat loss, and there'll be a lot of people who will have a combination interest in both, and then some that'll go, well, do you know what, I'll leave I will love my job, I'm a teacher or a nurse, I'm good on that side. But I want to break it up. But just before we do that, for anyone that isn't listening to this in part 1 and part 2 order, where's the best place for people to connect with you? Is it on Instagram, TikTok? Obviously I'll link them all in the description, and also the Academy I think is a nice little segue here, and we'll talk about the SC social circle in the next episode. But any links you want to give, please do that now.
Yeah, so my socials is just SKC Fitness on Instagram and TikTok, the Sean Casey Fitness Podcast. My academy opens in waves, so I launch 12-week challenges, and you can't join unless you join at a challenge launch. So the next one I believe is around mid-October, the end of October, and then I'll be running one in January, so keep an eye out for that. But for anyone that's new to me, I don't say come and join my academy straight away. I say come, consume my content, see if you actually like me, you connect with me, listen to my podcast, and then eventually you might end up buying a recipe book or join the academy. But I just want people to consume my free content starting off. Yeah,
and as somebody that consumes that free content and regularly sends people your way, you're putting out so much value when it comes to recipes and fitness tips. So I highly recommend it. Again, a hard right hook from me for people to go follow you, because I think there's so much value on there. Sean, really appreciate this part 1. Looking forward to getting straight into part 2. If you're listening to this as the launch, next Monday will be part 2. If you're listening to this in the back catalogue, you can go straight on to part 2 as of now.
Thanks very much, Brian.
There you have it. That is part 1 of a 2-part episode with Sean Casey on how to lose belly fat, the difference between burning fat and losing fat, and the worst diet advice on the internet. So much value in today's episode. And in part 2, we go in a very different direction with building social media. So part 2 will be Sean Casey on growing social media that allows you to turn your passion into your full-time, or into a full-time income. So if you have any aspirations to set up a side hustle, start your own business, or grow your social media for whatever reason, then that is the episode to stay tuned to. As I said, is somebody that has been following Sean since very early on, at the very beginning, as he mentioned in the episode. It's amazing to see how far he's came with it. And part 2 has as much value, albeit in a very different area. So stay tuned for that. That's all from me from this week's episode. Catch you all next Monday.